The rain tapped softly against the windowpane, a steady rhythm that matched Emily Parker's quiet thoughts as she sat in her favorite armchair, a warm cup of tea clasped between her hands, and stared out at the gray afternoon where outside, the world seemed blurred, wet and distant, as if it belonged to someone else entirely while inside. The house was silent since Emily's son Ryan had gone out with friends for the afternoon, leaving her alone in the spacious living room where normally she enjoyed these quiet moments, the soft solitude that allowed her mind to wander. But today, the silence felt heavier, more pressing, serving as a reminder of something she hadn't allowed herself to name in a long time. The subtle ache of being alone as her thoughts drifted while she watched the rain trace patterns on the glass. Emily, who had built her life around being a mother, a friend, a reliable presence for those she cared about, prided herself on her ability to listen, to understand, to be the calm in everyone else's storm. But lately, she had begun to notice the gaps, the quiet corners of her own heart that had been ignored, moments when she longed for someone to notice her in the same way she noticed the world around her, and she sighed, letting the warmth of her tea seep into her palms as the house felt too big without Ryan's laughter echoing off the walls, too quiet without the familiar chaos of their daily life. Yet even in the loneliness, there was a glimmer of hope. Gentle curiosity about what the day might bring, since she had learned long ago that life sometimes surprises you in the most unexpected ways. When a knock at the door shattered the soft rhythm of the rain, making Emily freeze for a moment, unsure who could be visiting on such a dreary afternoon when she wasn't expecting anyone, especially not now, when the world felt so still and heavy. So setting her cup down, she walked to the door, her heart beating a little faster than usual, and when she opened it, she saw a boy standing there, one she recognized immediately as Ethan, Ryan's best friend, who looked slightly older than she remembered. Yet there was something new in his expression that made her pause, his eyes serious, almost burdened, as he avoided looking directly at her, saying, "Hi, Mrs. Parker," softly, his voice barely above the sound of the rain. "Can I come in?" Which made Emily's curiosity surge, because something about the way he spoke, the hesitancy in his tone, told her this visit wasn't casual. There was a purpose here, something he had been carrying with him. So she nodded, stepping aside to let him enter the house, which felt warmer with him inside, though Emily could sense the tension in his posture as Ethan moved carefully, almost as if he were testing the air before he fully stepped in, then sat down on the couch, folding his hands in his lap, staring at the floor while Emily tried to smile, a gentle welcoming gesture, saying, "It's raining quite a bit today," lightly, though her curiosity lingered. "Do you want some tea?" To which Ethan murmured, "No thank you," not looking up, as the silence that followed was different from the quiet earlier. It was weighted with something unspoken, a tension that made Emily's heart flutter with both concern and anticipation as she sat across from him, studying his profile, noting that Ethan had always been polite, thoughtful, and careful with his words. But now there was a vulnerability in him that she hadn't seen before, seeming to be holding something inside, something important that he hadn't yet found the courage to share, which made Emily's mind begin to wander, imagining the possibilities of what he could want to say, feeling a strange mix of anxiety and hope, a gentle pull, a curiosity she couldn't shake, the kind of feeling that made your chest tighten and your thoughts scatter, even as you reminded yourself to remain calm while the room was silent again, broken only by the soft patter of rain against the windows, as Emily could feel the quiet stretching, the moment stretching, waiting for him to speak, since she had always believed in the power of listening, in giving space for others to share their truths, and now that belief was tested as she waited, unsure what this boy, this young man who had been part of her son's life for years, was about to reveal, until finally Ethan lifted his gaze, and for the first time, his eyes met hers with a depth there, a quiet intensity that made Emily's pulse quicken, as he seemed both nervous and resolute, as if he had rehearsed this moment countless times in his mind, saying, "I've been meaning to tell you something," his voice low but steady, "something important," which made Emily's heart catch in her chest, as the weight of his words, the sincerity behind them, created a flutter of emotion she hadn't expected, feeling the beginnings of a story unfolding, one she hadn't anticipated, but one she knew she had to witness. So she nodded gently, encouraging him without saying too much. "You can tell me anything, Ethan," she said softly, her voice calm but full of warmth. And just like that, the quiet, rainy afternoon transformed as the air in the room shifted, charged with a gentle tension, the kind that only comes when something deeply meaningful is about to be revealed, and Emily didn't know what he would say, or how it would change the dynamic of their small world. But a part of her already understood that this moment, this unplanned visit, would not be easily forgotten while the rain continued to fall, soft and rhythmic, but inside Emily's heart beat a little faster, alive with curiosity, hope, and the quiet thrill of an unexpected connection waiting to unfold as the rain outside had slowed to a soft drizzle, leaving the world glistening with tiny reflections of the gray sky while Emily watched Ethan as he fidgeted on the couch, his hands still neatly folded, his gaze shifting from the floor to her with quiet hesitance, and there was something about the way he sat, so earnest, that made her remember the first time she had met him when Ryan had been in middle school, shy and awkward, and Ethan had been his constant shadow, the friend who never left his side, and Emily had watched them through kitchen windows, laughing over cereal or homework, and had seen how much Ethan cared, not just for Ryan, but for the little world they shared, as there had always been a gentleness to him, a patience and thoughtfulness that reminded her of simpler days, and Ethan had visited countless times over the years where at first, Emily had only seen him as Ryan's friend, the polite, responsible boy who always said thank you and please and never caused trouble, but over time she began to notice subtleties. The way he remembered what she liked for tea, how he paused to help her with small chores, and how he always listened when she spoke, never interrupting, never judging, which was a rare quality in anyone, especially someone his age, and she remembered one winter afternoon years ago, when the power had gone out during a snowstorm and the three of them, Emily, Ryan and Ethan, had huddled by the fireplace, drinking cocoa and telling stories where Ethan had been nervous, a little awkward, yet he had shared a story about a pet bird he once had, and the way he described it had made Emily laugh until tears came to her eyes, and she had felt a warmth in her chest then, a simple human connection that was comforting and familiar, as over the years, those small moments had piled up into something quietly profound, and Emily had noticed the way Ethan's eyes would sometimes linger on her for a heartbeat longer than expected, or the way he would offer help even when it wasn't necessary, and at the time she hadn't thought much of it, just a kind boy showing respect and care. But now, seeing him sit there in her living room, she realized those subtle signals had always carried a deeper meaning when Ethan's voice broke her thoughts. I've been thinking about this for a long time, he said softly, his eyes finally meeting hers. Even when I was younger, I always felt like I could talk to you. Like you understood things that I didn't know how to say. Which made Emily's heart warm as she remembered the countless times he had lingered in the doorway of the kitchen or the living room, silently waiting for Ryan, yet always making small attempts to connect with her through a shy smile, a thoughtful question, a gentle joke. They had all been moments of connection that had left a mark, even if she hadn't realized it at the time, and he continued. I noticed you even before Ryan mentioned me, a faint blush coloring his cheeks. I noticed the way you care, the way you listen, the way you make people feel safe. I guess that's why I always wanted to be around you, which made Emily feel a strange mixture of surprise and nostalgia as the boy she had watched grow up, who had become so thoughtful and considerate over the years, was speaking words that had been silently building between them for a long time, and she thought about all those small gestures, all those quiet afternoons, and realized that each had been a thread in a tapestry of trust and emotional connection. Yet she also remembered the distance that had always kept them apart since Ethan had been Ryan's best friend first, always careful not to overstep boundaries, and Emily had been a mother, cautious and protective, never imagining that a deeper emotional bond could develop outside of her role as a parent, and so those feelings, whether hers or Ethan's, had remained unspoken, tucked quietly into the spaces between daily life and polite conversation, while the rain pattered softly against the windows, a gentle reminder of the past mingling with the present as Emily leaned back in her chair, studying him as he spoke in halting sentences, trying to put years of thought and feeling into words with a vulnerability in him now that made every memory, every small gesture, feel alive again, and she realized that this was not just admiration or fleeting affection. This was the culmination of years of quiet observation, respect, and emotional honesty. So she said softly, "You've always been very kind, Ethan," her voice calm, but full of emotion, more than most people your age. I've noticed it. And I think that's part of why you've always felt like you could talk to me. To which Ethan nodded, his shoulders relaxing slightly. I guess. I was always scared it wouldn't be the right time. Or that maybe I shouldn't feel like this. I didn't want to make things awkward with Ryan. Or with you. And Emily smiled gently, understanding completely that it had always been a delicate balance. Years of unspoken respect, of emotions carefully hidden, waiting for a moment when they could be expressed without misunderstanding, and now, here he was, finally finding the courage to share what had been quietly building for so long. So for a moment, they sat in silence, each lost in their own thoughts, the past and present merging into a quiet, emotional connection that felt safe, tender and real. And Emily felt a strange thrill, not of romance in the adult sense but of human connection, the kind that leaves your heart full, your mind thoughtful, and your spirit quietly joyful, until Ethan finally broke the silence with a small hopeful smile. "I'm glad I can tell you now." And Emily returned the smile, feeling the weight of years of unspoken words lifting ever so slightly. "Me too, Ethan." "Me too." As outside, the rain began to fade, the clouds parting just enough to let a soft golden light filter through, feeling like a promise, a small beautiful hint that perhaps the past, with all its quiet longing, had led to this moment for a reason, and the rain had finally stopped, leaving the streets outside glistening under a soft, late afternoon light as Emily watched the droplets reflecting the sun as they clung to the leaves and pavement, feeling a quiet anticipation, a subtle thrill, that had nothing to do with excitement and everything to do with something deeper. A moment she hadn't realized she had been waiting for while Ethan still sat across from her, shifting slightly in his chair, as though the air in the room held its own tension. His eyes, earnest and open, fixed on hers, and Emily couldn't help but notice the small, almost imperceptible gestures that had always made him unique, the way he leaned slightly forward when he spoke, the careful way he chose his words, the pauses that gave weight to every thought. And he began, "You know, I didn't plan to come over today. I felt like I had to." Which made Emily tilt her head, curious. "Had to? Why?" And he hesitated, looking away for just a moment before meeting her gaze again. "Something happened, something small, but it made me think. And I realized that waiting any longer wouldn't feel right." Which made Emily's heart stir with a fragility in his tone, a vulnerability that felt almost like an invitation as she realized that life had a way of nudging people toward moments they weren't expecting, and perhaps this was one of those gentle, inevitable nudges. So she asked softly, "What happened?" trying to keep her voice calm while feeling her own pulse quicken, and Ethan smiled faintly, as though sharing the memory made him both nervous and relieved. "I was walking home from school and I saw a dog, one of those small scruffy ones, you know, stuck in the rain. Nobody was around to help it, so I carried it under my jacket until I got home," which made Emily laugh quietly, shaking her head. "You've always had that instinct to help, even with the smallest things." And he nodded, a blush rising faintly in his cheeks. "Yeah, but as I walked, I thought about all those afternoons here. The times I came over just to talk, to sit quietly, or to help Ryan with homework. I realized something. How much those moments meant to me. And I thought maybe it's time I tell you." Making Emily feel her chest tighten, a familiar warmth spreading through her as memories of the past mingled with the present. The little things, Ethan carrying a stray dog, his careful attention, the quiet care he always showed, suddenly felt like more than just gestures. They were signs of a heart that had always been thoughtful, attentive, and quietly affectionate. So she reached for her tea, taking a slow sip to steady herself. "It seems you've been carrying a lot of feelings quietly, haven't you?" she asked, half smiling, and Ethan's eyes widened slightly, but he nodded. "Yeah, I guess I have. And I think some things are too important to stay unspoken forever." Which made Emily study him, realizing that the years of observing each other, of moments shared silently, had led to this instant. A small twist of fate that reignited the emotional bond that had quietly existed for so long, the timing uncanny, yet it felt completely natural, like a puzzle piece finally fitting into place. "You've grown so much, Ethan," Emily said softly, her voice carrying a mix of admiration and warmth. "And yet, some things about you haven't changed at all. That kindness, that careful attention, it's still here. And I see it now more clearly than ever." And for a long moment they simply looked at each other, words unnecessary, the room filled with the kind of quiet intensity that only comes when two people who care deeply have finally acknowledged it, not in a romantic adult way, but in the profound way of mutual understanding, respect, and shared history, until Ethan finally broke the silence. "I guess I just wanted you to know. I didn't want to wait any longer and regret it." And Emily felt a lump in her throat, overwhelmed by the purity of his confession. This wasn't about grand gestures or dramatic declarations. It was about honesty, trust, and the courage to finally speak what had been quietly building for years. And she realized that feelings didn't always have to be dramatic to be meaningful. Sometimes, the smallest truths carried the greatest weight. As the late afternoon sunlight shifted, casting a golden glow across the room, and for a moment everything felt suspended in time, the air seeming warmer, the world softer, and Emily realized that this small twist of fate, the rain, the stray dog, Ethan's visit, had created a bridge between past and present, a connection that neither of them could ignore. So she leaned back slightly, smiling, her heart full but calm. "I'm glad you told me, Ethan. Truly. It means more than you know." And his shoulders relaxed, and he allowed himself a small, relieved smile. "Thanks, Mrs. Parker. Really." And in that quiet, ordinary room, amid the soft glow of the fading sun and the gentle echo of rain still dripping from the roof, something shifted. A bond that had been quietly nurtured over years had now been acknowledged, and the present felt alive with possibility, not as a promise of dramatic change, but as a gentle, heartfelt twist of fate that would linger in both their hearts for a long time to come. And Emily realized that life sometimes worked in mysterious ways, moments that seemed small, an afternoon visit, a stray dog, a hesitant confession, could awaken feelings and connections that had been quietly waiting, tucked in the corners of memory and longing. And for the first time in a long while, she felt a sense of hope, a belief that some bonds are meant to be recognized, even if the world around them continues on in its usual rhythm. As the late afternoon sun had softened to a gentle amber glow, casting long shadows across the living room while Emily and Ethan sat in relative silence, each wrapped in their own thoughts, the quiet between them heavy yet comforting. Words had been spoken, confessions of admiration and care, but there were still layers left untouched, truths they hadn't dared voice, feelings that lingered just beneath the surface. And Emily traced the rim of her teacup with her finger, thinking about the years she had spent quietly observing Ethan grow up. The polite, thoughtful boy had always carried a certain seriousness, a way of seeing the world with clarity that was rare for someone his age, and yet, there had always been more than met the eye, tiny gestures, subtle glances, moments that hinted at a depth neither of them had fully acknowledged, while Ethan meanwhile was struggling with his own thoughts, having always admired Emily, not in a childish way, but with a quiet reverence that grew stronger over the years, having watched her patience, her kindness, the way she listened and understood without judgment. And over time, those small seeds of admiration had grown into something far more significant, a longing to connect on a level deeper than mere friendship or casual conversation. Yet both of them hesitated as Emily reminded herself that Ethan was still her son's best friend, someone whose trust she didn't want to break. And Ethan, despite the courage it had taken to speak openly for the first time, was careful to keep their connection gentle and appropriate, knowing the delicate balance that existed between admiration and respect, until finally, Ethan broke the silence, his voice quiet but earnest. I sometimes wish I could tell you everything I've felt over the years, but I didn't know if it was right." Which made Emily's heart tighten as she understood completely. There had been moments, countless small moments, when she had noticed his subtle attentions, his quiet care, and she had wondered what they meant, yet she had kept her distance, not wanting to misinterpret, not wanting to cross boundaries she respected deeply. "You don't have to explain," she said softly, her eyes meeting his. "I've always known in my own way. And I think part of what makes this connection so special is that it's been built slowly over time, layer by layer." And Ethan nodded, swallowing hard, looking away for a moment, gazing out the window at the fading light. "I've always admired how you notice the little things," he admitted. "The way you listen, the way you care, even when nobody else does. I've tried to learn from you in a way." Which made Emily feel a warmth rise in her chest. It wasn't a rush of romantic passion, it was something far subtler, far more profound. It was the recognition of a shared humanity, a bond built on years of observation, care, and quiet respect. It was a connection that didn't need dramatic gestures to exist. It simply did in the space between them, in the things left unsaid. And there was another pause, a silence filled with mutual understanding as Emily thought about all the moments she had brushed past. Ethan's thoughtful questions, the way he lingered for a second too long at the door, the quiet attentiveness that had always distinguished him from other children his age. Each memory now felt like a thread in a tapestry, woven carefully over time, forming a bond that neither of them had truly acknowledged until now. "I guess I've always been scared," Ethan said finally, his voice barely audible. "Scared that if I spoke too much I might ruin something or make things awkward. I wanted to respect your space, your life, Ryan's life too, And Emily's eyes softened as she understood completely. Life had a way of teaching patience through the quietest of lessons, and Ethan had learned them well. I know, she replied gently. And I've always respected that too. That's part of why I admire you. The thoughtfulness, the care, it's rare to see. And a small, comfortable silence settled over them again. It wasn't awkward, it wasn't tense. It was the kind of silence that comes from two people who have shared years of observation, small gestures, and unspoken feelings, and now sit together with the quiet acknowledgement that what they feel is real, even if it remains partially unsaid. And Emily's heart ached slightly, not with longing in the way stories often depict, but with the gentle ache of understanding, recognition, and hope. She realized that life had given them this rare moment, a chance to sit side by side, fully aware of the emotional bond they shared, even if the world outside did not. And Ethan finally spoke again, softer this time, more reflective. It feels strange to finally say some of these things. Even now, I feel like I haven't said enough. And Emily reached across the small space between them, resting a hand briefly on his. You've said enough, she whispered, her voice steady but full of warmth. Sometimes the unspoken truths are just as powerful as the words themselves. And he nodded, his eyes glistening slightly with a quiet vulnerability there, a raw honesty that left both of them suspended in the gentle intensity of the moment. And though the conversation had not resolved every feeling, every thought, it had opened a door, a space where honesty, admiration, and deep emotional connection could exist safely, fully, and beautifully as outside. The sun dipped lower, bathing the room in a soft, golden glow, and for Emily and Ethan, the light felt like a promise, not of dramatic change, but of understanding, patience, and the kind of connection that grows stronger with time. And in that quiet, amber-lit room, both of them knew that even what remained unspoken could carry its own kind of power, intense, profound, and entirely safe. The day lingered on, and so did the quiet bond between them, a bond built on patience, admiration, and the unspoken truth that some connections, once discovered, never truly fade. And the sun had nearly set, casting a warm, golden hue across the living room as shadows stretched lazily across the floor, blending with the soft glow of the lamp on the side table while Emily and Ethan sat together. The silence between them heavier than it had ever been. It was the kind of silence that waits for something to break it. Something inevitable, something long overdue. And Emily had spent the afternoon sipping tea, thinking about all the small moments that had led to this point, every visit, every quiet conversation, every subtle gesture Ethan had made over the years had built a bridge between them, a bridge made of trust, respect, and unspoken understanding. And now, it felt as though that bridge was about to carry them into a new, uncharted space of emotion. As Ethan shifted slightly, fidgeting with his hands, and Emily noticed the hesitation in his movements, the way he paused as if gathering courage from somewhere deep inside. She had seen this look on him before, when he had struggled with decisions that mattered, but now it was different. There was a quiet intensity in his gaze, a vulnerability that made her heart tighten. He began, his voice trembling slightly. I've been holding something back for too long. He took a deep breath, looking down at his hands, then back at Emily. I know it's complicated, and I know I shouldn't have kept it to myself, but I care about you. Not in a way that would make things awkward or inappropriate. But I care deeply. And I think I've been afraid to admit it even to myself, which made Emily's chest tighten as she could feel the weight of his words, not as a shock, but as the inevitable arrival of something that had been building over years. Her eyes softened and she reached out, placing a comforting hand over his. You don't have to be afraid, Ethan, she said gently. I've seen it all along. And I've felt it too, in a way that's safe, that's real, and that matters. It's not about rushing into anything. It's about recognizing the truth of what's already here. And he looked up, his eyes glistening with emotion. Really? He whispered. You understand? To which Emily nodded. Yes, I do. And I've always valued that bond we share. The quiet understanding, the care, the way we can be honest without fear. That hasn't changed. And it never will. And for a long moment neither of them spoke, the room filled with a calm intensity, a quiet acknowledgement of the truth that had finally surfaced. The emotions they had both carried silently for years now had a space to exist openly. It was a turning point, not marked by dramatic gestures, but by a profound recognition of each other's hearts. And Ethan took a deep breath, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. I was worried, he admitted softly, that if I said anything it might ruin things, that I might hurt our friendship, or make things weird with Ryan. But now I realize that honesty matters more than fear. And I couldn't let another day pass without telling you how I feel. Which made Emily's eyes glisten with unshed tears. She had always believed in the power of truth, in the quiet strength it brings when shared with someone who truly understands. "I'm glad you told me, Ethan," she said, her voice steady yet full of warmth. "I think we've both been patient for a long time. And now we can just be honest with each other without worry or doubt." And a small smile appeared on Ethan's face, a mixture of relief and quiet joy. "I never expected it to feel this good. Just to say it out loud and know that you understand." And Emily returned the smile, feeling a deep sense of peace. "It is good," she said softly. "And it's more than that, it's comforting. It's the kind of connection that stays with you no matter what. That's rare, Ethan. And it's worth holding on to." As the room seemed warmer somehow, the shadows receding as the golden light filled the space outside, the evening air was calm, carrying the scent of rain-washed streets, and Emily realized that life often works in quiet, surprising ways, moments that seem ordinary. An afternoon together, a small act of courage, a heartfelt conversation, can transform into something extraordinary when emotions are spoken with honesty and care. And Ethan leaned back slightly, breathing easier now, the tension finally leaving his shoulders. "Thank you," he said simply, "for listening, for understanding, for letting me be honest." And Emily's hand remained on his for a moment longer, a quiet reassurance. "Thank you," she replied, "for trusting me. And for caring enough to speak the truth." And in that warm amber-lit room, the unspoken had finally been spoken. The bond they shared, the admiration, respect, and deep emotional connection, had moved to a new level, one built on honesty and mutual understanding. It was not a dramatic change, but a profound one, the kind that leaves hearts fuller, minds calmer, and spirits quietly joyful. And for both of them, this turning point was more than a moment. It was a promise that whatever life brought next, they had acknowledged the truth of their feelings, and sometimes that acknowledgement is more powerful than any gesture, any words, or any circumstance. As the evening continued to settle around them, calm and gentle, and Emily, watching Ethan sit with a mixture of relief and contentment, realized that the heart has a way of knowing what it needs long before the mind catches up. The turning point had come, and with it, a quiet sense of hope, understanding, and emotional fulfillment that would linger far beyond the fading light of the day. And the next morning, sunlight filtered softly through the curtains, casting a warm glow across the living room as Emily sat at the kitchen table, a cup of tea in her hands, and listened to the quiet hum of the day beginning. There was a calmness in the air, the kind that comes after a storm has passed, both literal and emotional. The events of the previous evening lingered in her mind, a gentle reminder of how small moments can carry profound significance. And Ethan arrived soon after, stepping inside with a careful, almost shy smile, holding a small notebook under his arm, one he had used for sketches, lists, and little observations over the years. And Emily noticed the way he looked around the room, the careful attentiveness he always had, and she felt a warm familiarity wash over her. "Good morning," Emily said softly. "Coffee or tea?" To which he replied, "Tea, please." His voice steady but carrying a quiet note of anticipation, and as they sat across from each other, the air felt light, yet still filled with an unspoken understanding. The previous night had been a turning point, a moment when truth had been shared and hearts had been acknowledged. And now, in the soft morning light, the bond between them felt deeper, more grounded, and quietly joyful. "I've been thinking about what you said last night," Ethan began, carefully choosing his words, "about honesty and about the connection we share. It's comforting to know that it's mutual." And Emily smiled, her heart full. "It is comforting," she agreed. "And it's more than that. It's a reminder that meaningful connections don't always need to be dramatic or loud. Sometimes the quiet, steady ones are the strongest." And Ethan nodded, his gaze thoughtful. "I realize that I've always admired how you handle life. Your patience, your kindness, and the way you notice things that others overlook. It's inspired me more than I realized," which made Emily feel a lump in her throat, touched by the depth of his sincerity. "And I've admired your thoughtfulness too," she said gently. "You've grown into a remarkable young man, caring, brave, and full of empathy. The way you see the world, it's rare and beautiful." And they shared a quiet moment, the kind of silence that feels full, not empty. As outside, the morning birds began to sing, a gentle soundtrack to the unfolding day, and for both of them, the world felt lighter, brighter, and more promising than it had the day before. When Ethan shifted slightly, a nervous but hopeful smile on his face. "I was wondering, if we keep building this connection step by step, could it always stay like this? Honest, open, and full of understanding?" And Emily's eyes softened as she reached across the table, briefly resting her hand over his. "Yes," she said, warmth in her voice. "It can. Because what we've built isn't fleeting. It's grounded in years of trust, care, and respect. And that's a foundation that will carry us far no matter what comes next." And for a long moment they simply looked at each other, hearts quietly beating in sync. There was no rush, no pressure, only the knowledge that some bonds, when nurtured carefully and honestly, have a way of lasting far longer than fleeting moments of passion or excitement ever could. And the day moved forward, calm and unhurried, as Emily and Ethan spent time together, talking about small everyday things, school, books, hobbies, memories they shared with Ryan. Each conversation was light, but beneath it flowed the current of a deeper understanding, the kind that makes hearts feel full without a single dramatic gesture. And when Ryan returned home that evening, he was greeted by the sight of his best friend sitting comfortably in Emily's living room, chatting and laughing quietly. There was a warmth to the scene, a sense of harmony and trust that Ryan immediately recognized. Though he didn't know the depth of their recent conversations, he could see the bond between them, one built on years of observation, care, and mutual respect. And Emily watched Ethan interact with Ryan, a soft smile on her face, realizing that the events of the past few days had brought clarity, honesty, and a quiet joy that she hadn't felt in years, the emotional weight that had lingered between her and Ethan was now replaced by a calm, steady warmth, a promise that the connection they shared would endure, grounded in understanding and care. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, Emily stepped to the window, looking out at the soft glow of the evening, thinking about the journey they had taken, the small gestures, the quiet moments, the unspoken truths, and finally, the heartfelt confessions. Life had a way of teaching patience and timing, and she understood now that some bonds are meant to unfold slowly, in their own perfect rhythm. And Ethan joined her by the window, standing quietly at her side. They didn't need words in that moment. The shared silence was enough. It carried the weight of understanding, the reassurance of connection, and the quiet promise that whatever the future held, they had found something rare and beautiful. And so the day ended, not with dramatic declarations or sudden changes, but with a gentle, heartfelt resolution. Emily and Ethan had acknowledged the truth of their emotions, embraced the bond they shared, and allowed themselves the quiet joy of knowing that connection, honesty, and care could endure. And as the first stars appeared in the sky, Emily felt a lightness in her heart she hadn't experienced in years. It was a feeling of hope, of emotional fulfillment, and of the deep, lasting power of bonds built over time. The unspoken, once lingering in the corners of their hearts, had finally found its voice, leaving behind a warmth that would continue to grow quietly and beautifully with each passing day.